I still remember the crinkle of the old paper as I pulled it from my coat pocket. It was folded into a tiny square, like something passed in a high school hallway, not at a formal meeting where my family's legacy was being discussed. The note read simply, "Run from your mother now. Philip." My heartbeat pounded in my ears. Philip, the notary? Why would he write something like this? At the inheritance meeting of all places? I looked across the long oak table where my mother sat in her tailored navy suit, her face unreadable as always. Her fingers drummed lightly against the mahogany surface, waiting for the lawyer to finish going over the paperwork. She was calm, poised, the image of control. But that note burned in my palm like a warning from the future. I didn't run. Not then. I stayed through the rest of the meeting. I smiled politely. I even hugged her goodbye. And then, 6 hours later, I found myself locked inside my childhood home, with my phone missing, my car keys gone, and a glass of tea that tasted slightly bitter. That's when I realized Philip had just saved my life. My name is Margot Holloway, and for most of my adult life, I lived in denial. I believed my mother, Caroline, was complicated. Difficult, yes, cold sometimes, but still my mother. A widow, respected in our small Asheville community. Everyone thought she was a saint for raising me alone after my father died in a car accident when I was just 10. But what they didn't see was the manipulation. The subtle way she controlled everything from my career choices to who I dated to how I dressed. She had expectations. And I spent 40 years trying to meet them. When my aunt passed away last month, she left behind a sizable estate, over $2 million in assets and properties, including a century-old family home in Charleston. It was supposed to be split equally between my mother, my cousin Dean, and me. But when the inheritance meeting was called, something felt off. My cousin Dean didn't show up, and no one could reach him. My mother sat at the head of the table like a monarch, the notary. Philip Whitmore seemed uneasy. His hands trembled slightly as he arranged the paperwork. I thought it was just nerves. It wasn't. After the meeting, I drove home to my small apartment in the arts district of Asheville. It wasn't much, but it was mine, the one space my mother couldn't control. I'd been working as a graphic designer for a local marketing firm, a career that had satisfied me but never quite matched the law degree my mother had envisioned for me. I was fixing dinner when my phone rang. My mother's picture flashed on the screen. "Margot, dear." Her voice was honey-sweet. "I've been thinking about your aunt's house in Charleston. Why don't you come over tonight so we can discuss it? I have some wonderful ideas about what we could do with it." Something in her tone made my skin prickle. The note from Philip came flooding back to mind. "Actually, Mom, I'm really tired tonight. Can we talk tomorrow?" A slight pause. "No, Margot, it really needs to be tonight. I've made your favorite tea." The mint one, I hesitated. "Fine, I'll be there in an hour." When I arrived at my mother's Victorian home on the edge of town, the place felt different somehow. The familiar hallways of my childhood seemed to have narrowed. The shadows deepened. My mother waited in the sitting room, 2 cups of tea already poured. "Sit, dear. Drink your tea before it gets cold." I sat but didn't touch the cup. "What did you want to discuss about Aunt Martha's house?" She smiled, that perfect smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Oh, I've been thinking that selling it would be the best option. The market is excellent right now. Selling? But Mom, Aunt Martha wanted us to keep it in the family. She specifically mentioned that in her will. Well, plans change. And speaking of plans, I'm a bit concerned about you, Margot." "Concerned? Why?" She reached for a folder on the side table. "You haven't been yourself lately. All this stress with the inheritance. The pressure at your job. I've been speaking with Dr. Winters, and he agrees that you might benefit from some rest." I recognized the folder she was holding. It had medical letterhead. My stomach dropped. "What are you talking about?" "It's for your own good, dear. A short stay at Pinewood, just until you're feeling more stable." Pinewood. The private psychiatric facility outside of town. That's when I noticed Diane, my mother's goddaughter, standing in the doorway behind me. She'd been unusually present in my mother's life over the past year, always hovering, always whispering. Now she stepped forward with a sympathetic smile that didn't match the coldness in her eyes. "It's going to be okay, Margot. We're here to help you." I stood up abruptly, knocking the untouched tea across the antique carpet. I need to use the bathroom. My mother's face tightened. Of course, dear. Hurry back. In the bathroom, I locked the door and frantically searched my coat pockets until I found Philip's note again. I stared at it, my hands shaking. Run from your mother now. Something clicked into place. The absent cousin. The nervous notary. The bitter tea. The psychiatric evaluation I never had. I opened the bathroom window and climbed out into the garden, just like I used to do as a teenager when I wanted to escape my mother's strict curfews. Only this time, I wasn't sneaking out to meet friends. I was running for my life. As I sprinted through the immaculately maintained garden, I heard the bathroom door being forced open, followed by my mother's voice sharp with anger. Find her? She can't have gone far. I didn't look back. I ran through the darkness toward the woods that bordered my mother's property, my heart hammering against my ribs. I had only one thought. I needed to find Philip Whitmore. He was the only one who knew what was really happening. The only one who had tried to warn me. The only one who might help me understand why my own mother was trying to destroy me. Dawn broke over Asheville as I huddled in a 24-hour diner, nursing my third cup of coffee. My hands still trembled, not from the caffeine but from the shock of realization that had settled over me like a cold shroud. The waitress, an older woman with kind eyes, had stopped asking questions after I ordered breakfast and just kept refilling my cup with a sympathetic nod. I had spent the night moving from place to place, first hiding in the woods, then walking to a gas station where I called a rideshare to take me downtown. I'd withdrawn as much cash as I could from an ATM, knowing my mother might track my card usage. Now I sat, watching the morning commuters pass by the window, wondering how many of them had ever discovered that their entire life was built on quicksand. My phone buzzed for the 20th time. Another text from my mother. Margot, everyone is worried sick. Please come home. We can get you the help you need. I turned the phone off and slipped it into my pocket. Then I pulled out the small notebook I'd bought at the gas station and began to write down everything I could remember about the inheritance meeting, about Philip's behavior, about my mother's strange alliance with Diane. Philip Whitmore had been our family's notary for years. He was a quiet, precise man who always wore bow ties and smelled faintly of pipe tobacco. He had known my father, had handled my aunt's affairs, and had always been professionally cordial with my mother. What had he seen that made him risk his career to warn me? At 8:30 a.m., I called his office from the diner's payphone. Whitmore Notary and Legal Services. A cheerful female voice answered. I need to speak with Philip Whitmore. It's urgent. I'm sorry, Mr. Whitmore isn't in today. May I take a message? My heart sank. Do you know when he'll be back? A pause. He's actually taking a few personal days. Is there something another notary can help you with? No, it has to be Philip. Please, it's regarding the Holloway estate. Can you tell me how to reach him? Another pause, longer this time. Who is calling, please? Margot Holloway. I heard muffled conversation, then, Ms. Holloway, Mr. Whitmore left a message in case you called. He said to meet him at the Blue Ridge Coffee House at 10 a.m. Do you know the place? I did. It was a small cafe on the outskirts of town, far from my mother's usual haunts. Yes. Thank you. I arrived at the cafe 30 minutes early, choosing a table with a clear view of both the entrance and the parking lot. The place was nearly empty on a weekday morning. Just a couple of remote workers tapping on laptops and an elderly man reading a newspaper. At precisely 10 a.m., Philip Whitmore walked in, looking even more nervous than he had at the meeting. His bow tie was slightly askew and dark circles shadowed his eyes. He spotted me immediately and hurried over, sliding into the seat across from me without ordering anything. You got my note, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Yes. What's going on, Philip? Why did you warn me about my mother? He glanced around the cafe before leaning closer. Because what they're planning is illegal, and worse, it's cruel. I've known you since you were a child, Margot. I couldn't stand by and watch it happen. Watch what happened. Please, I need to understand. Philip pulled a manila envelope from his briefcase and slid it across the table. Your aunt's real will. The one that was presented yesterday was a forgery. My hands trembled as I opened the envelope. Inside was a document that looked similar to what I'd seen at the meeting, but with subtle differences. The real will stipulates that the Charleston house goes to you alone, not to be sold for at least 10 years. The liquid assets are to be divided equally, but your portion is to be given to you directly. not placed in a trust controlled by your mother as the forged will states. I looked up at him, stunned. A forgery? But how? Your mother and Diane have been planning this for months. They needed control of your inheritance, but they also needed to discredit you in case you fought back. He lowered his voice even further. There's more. Your cousin Dean didn't just miss the meeting. He's in hiding. Hiding from what? From whom? Philip corrected. Your mother hired someone to threaten him, made it clear that if he contested anything about the will, his past indiscretions would become very public. I remembered Dean's struggles with addiction years ago, something he'd overcome, but that could still damage his reputation as a high school principal. And there's this. Philip pulled out another document. A psychiatric evaluation claiming you have delusional tendencies and paranoia. It's signed by Dr. Winters, who coincidentally received a very generous donation from your mother for his research last month. The pieces were falling into place with horrifying clarity. The tea, the folder my mother had been holding, the planned stay at Pinewood. They were going to have me committed, I whispered, so they could take control of everything. Philip nodded grimly. Once you were declared mentally incompetent, your mother would have power of attorney. She could liquidate all your assets, including the Charleston house. According to what I've pieced together, they've already got buyers lined up, developers who want to tear it down for condos. I felt sick. The Charleston house had been in our family for generations. My aunt had loved it, had preserved its history, had specifically wanted it to stay in the family. Why? My mother doesn't need the money. And why involve Diane? From what I can tell, Diane stands to get a significant cut. She's been manipulating your mother, playing on her controlling tendencies. As for your mother, Philip hesitated. Margot, I think this isn't just about money for her. It's about control. She's always controlled your life. This was her way of ensuring she always would. A chill ran through me as I remembered a lifetime of subtle manipulations. The college choices that somehow aligned with what my mother wanted. The relationships that mysteriously fell apart whenever my partners showed too much independence. The career path that kept me close to home, under her watchful eye. What do I do now? I asked, my voice small in the quiet cafe. You fight, Philip said firmly. I know someone, a lawyer in Raleigh named Evelyn Rhodes. She specializes in cases like this. But first, you need to be safe. Your mother has resources, connections. You can't go home, can't use credit cards, can't contact anyone she might be monitoring. He slid a key across the table. My lake cabin. It's about an hour from here. No one knows about it except my sister in Idaho. Stay there while we build the case. I took the key, overwhelmed by his kindness. Philip, why are you helping me? You're risking everything. He was quiet for a moment, staring at his hands. Your father was my friend. The real James Holloway, not the version your mother talks about. He had concerns before he died. About Caroline. About what might happen to you. What are you saying? Philip's eyes met mine, filled with a sadness I couldn't fully comprehend. That's a conversation for another day. For now, we focus on keeping you safe and fighting back legally. Can you get to the cabin on your own? I nodded, thinking of the cash I had withdrawn. Yes, I can take a bus part of the way, then walk. But what about clothes, supplies? There's a general store near the lake. Buy what you need there. He wrote something on a napkin. This is Evelyn's number. Memorize it, then destroy this. Call her tomorrow at 9 a.m. exactly. Tell her Philip sent me about the Holloway matter. She'll understand. He stood to leave, then paused. Margot, be careful. Your mother isn't just manipulative, she's dangerous when threatened. She won't stop easily. As I watched Philip walk away, I felt a strange mixture of terror and determination rising within me. For 40 years, I had been living in my mother's carefully constructed reality. Now that the veil had been lifted, there was no going back. I had a choice to make. Continue running, or stand and fight for the truth and for my freedom. I finished my coffee, left cash on the table, and walked out into the bright morning sunshine with a new resolve. My mother had controlled my past, but she would not control my future. This was my life. And I was taking it back. The lake cabin was exactly as Philip had described it. Small, rustic, and completely isolated. Nestled among tall pines on the eastern shore of Lake Lure, it had a weathered wooden dock stretching into calm waters and a porch swing that creaked gently in the afternoon breeze. Inside, the cabin smelled of cedar and old books. with simple furnishings and a small wood stove that would keep it warm as the autumn nights grew colder. I arrived just as the sun was beginning its descent behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the water. The journey had been complicated: a bus to a neighboring town, followed by a rideshare to a hiking trail entrance, and finally a 3-mile walk along the lakeshore. I was exhausted, my city shoes blistered, but felt safer than I had in 24 hours. After exploring the cabin and finding it stocked with basic necessities, I sat on the porch swing and tried to process everything that had happened. The inheritance meeting, Philip's warning, my mother's plot to have me committed, the forged will, it all seemed like something from a psychological thriller, not the life of a 40-year-old graphic designer from Asheville. That night, I slept fitfully on the cabin's small bed, dreams filled with images of my mother's cold eyes and endless hospital corridors. I woke before dawn, made strong coffee on the propane stove, and watched the sunrise over the lake while rehearsing what I would say to Evelyn Rhodes. At exactly 9 a.m., I walked to the end of the dock where Philip had said the cell reception was strongest and dialed the number he'd given me. "Rhodes Legal Services," answered a crisp female voice. "Philip sent me about the Holloway matter," I said, my heart racing. There was a brief pause. "I see. Hold one moment, please." After a minute of silence, another woman came on the line. Her voice was lower, authoritative but warm. "This is Evelyn Rhodes. You must be Margot Holloway." "Yes, thank you for speaking with me. Philip briefed me yesterday." "I'm sorry about your situation, Ms. Holloway. It's more common than you might think, though your mother's approach is particularly aggressive. Please call me Margot." I took a deep breath. "Can you help me?" "I can and I will. But you need to understand this won't be quick or easy. Your mother has resources, social standing, and a head start. We'll need to be methodical and gather irrefutable evidence." "What kind of evidence?" "Bank records showing the transfer of funds to Dr. Winters. Communications between your mother and Diane discussing their plans. The original will that Philip provided and proof it was forged. And we need to find your cousin Dean." I nodded, though she couldn't see me. "Philip said he's in hiding." "Yes, but we need his testimony. If your mother threatened him to stay away from the inheritance meeting, that's coercion. It strengthens our case significantly." We talked for nearly an hour, with Evelyn outlining a strategy that was both legal and psychological. She advised me to stay hidden, to avoid all contact with my mother or anyone connected to her, and to begin documenting everything I could remember about my mother's controlling behaviors over the years. "This isn't just about the inheritance," Evelyn explained. "It's about establishing a pattern of manipulation and control. The court needs to see that this latest action is part of a lifelong behavior, not an isolated incident." As I hung up, I felt a strange mix of emotions: fear at the battle ahead, anger at my mother's betrayal, but also a subtle sense of relief. For the first time, someone was validating what I had felt for years but could never quite articulate: that my mother's love had always come with strings attached, that her concern was really about control. Over the next few days, I settled into a routine at the cabin. Mornings were spent writing detailed accounts of my life with Caroline, cataloging incidents that I had dismissed or rationalized at the time, but now recognized as manipulation. Afternoons, I would walk the perimeter of the lake, thinking through strategies and occasionally calling Evelyn from different locations to avoid establishing a pattern. 1 week into my stay, Philip visited, bringing supplies, clothes, and news. "Your mother has reported you missing," he said as we sat on the porch watching the sunset. "She's painting a very convincing picture of a daughter having a mental breakdown, wandering off in a delusional state." "Has she gone to the police?" "Yes, but not immediately. She waited 3 days, just long enough to seem concerned, but not so long that an intensive search would be launched. It's calculated, like everything she does." I felt a chill despite the warm evening. "And Diane?" "Playing the supportive family friend, of course. She's giving interviews to local news, talking about how concerned everyone is, how they just want to get you the help you need." His tone was bitter. "What about my apartment?" "My job? Your mother has convinced your landlord to let her into your apartment, claiming she's gathering your medication. As for your job, she's been in contact with your boss, saying you're having a health crisis and will need extended leave." I clenched my fists. "She's erasing me. Piece by piece," Philip nodded grimly. "That's why we need to move quickly. Evelyn thinks we have enough to file for an emergency injunction to halt any action on your aunt's estate. It won't solve everything, but it buys us time. Have you been able to find Dean? Not yet, but we have a lead. A former colleague of his thinks he might be staying at a cabin near Boone. As Philip prepared to leave, he handed me a small black device. It's a burner phone. Evelyn's number is programmed in. Use it only for essential communications, then power it off completely. He paused at the door, his expression grave. Margot, there's something else you should know. I've been doing some digging into your father's accident. My heart skipped. What about it? The police report has some inconsistencies. Your father's brake lines were severed, but it was ruled an accident due to poor maintenance. What are you saying? I whispered, though part of me already knew. I'm saying that your mother's behavior now might not be the first time she's gone to extreme lengths to get what she wants. He squeezed my shoulder gently. I'm sorry. I know that's a lot to process. We'll talk more when I have concrete information. After he left, I sat alone in the darkening cabin, my mind reeling. Could my mother, controlling and manipulative as she was, have been responsible for my father's death? The idea was almost too horrible to contemplate. And yet, after what I'd learned about her in the past week, I couldn't dismiss it entirely. That night, I dreamed of my father for the first time in years. In the dream, he was sitting on the edge of my childhood bed, just as he used to when I had nightmares. His kind eyes crinkled at the corners as he smiled at me. Remember what I always told you, Magpie? He said, using his special nickname for me. The truth may hurt for a little while, but a lie hurts forever. I woke with tears on my face, but a renewed determination in my heart. Whatever the truth was about my father, about my mother, about my family's past, I needed to face it. The cycle of manipulation and fear had to end. The next morning, I called Evelyn with a decision. I don't just want to fight for my inheritance, I told her. I want the whole truth. About everything. There was a brief silence on the line. Then I understand. It won't be easy, Margot. Are you sure you're ready? I thought of my father's words from my dream. Yes, no more hiding. No more running. It's time to bring everything into the light. Then let's get to work, Evelyn replied, her voice strong and sure. We start by finding your cousin Dean. The small cafe in Boone was busy with lunchtime customers when I spotted Dean sitting alone in the corner booth. He looked thinner than when I'd last seen him, his normally neatly trimmed beard now fuller, his eyes darting nervously around the room. He didn't notice me until I slid into the seat across from him. Margot? His voice was a hoarse whisper. What are you doing here? It's not safe. For either of us, apparently. I kept my voice low. I got your message through Philip. Thank you for agreeing to meet. Dean glanced anxiously toward the door. We shouldn't stay long. She might have people watching. My mother? Who else? He let out a bitter laugh. The great Caroline Holloway doesn't like it when people interfere with her plans. I studied my cousin's face. Dean and I had never been particularly close growing up. He lived in Charlotte with his parents, and we only saw each other at family gatherings. But I had always liked his straightforward nature and dry humor. Now, he looked haunted. Tell me what happened, Dean. From the beginning. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. It started about 2 months ago, after Aunt Martha's funeral. Your mother invited me to lunch, said she wanted to discuss the inheritance. I thought nothing of it. He paused as the waitress brought him a coffee refill, waiting until she was out of earshot before continuing. At lunch? She was all charm, reminiscing about Aunt Martha, talking about family legacy. Then she casually mentioned my trouble from years back. I nodded, understanding immediately. In his 20s, Dean had struggled with opioid addiction following a sports injury. He'd been arrested once for possession, but had gone through a diversion program instead of serving time. Since then, he'd rebuilt his life, becoming a respected high school principal in Charlotte. She made it clear that if I contested anything about Aunt Martha's will, the school board would receive an anonymous tip about my ongoing drug problem, complete with fabricated evidence. She even showed me doctored photos of me appearing to buy drugs. I'd lose my job, my reputation, everything. That's blackmail, I said, anger rising in my throat. Of course it is. But who would believe me over Caroline Holloway, respected widow and community leader? He shook his head. I thought about fighting it, but then I started noticing strange cars parked outside my house. My office at school was broken into, though nothing was taken. My girlfriend's tires were slashed. So you ran. I took an emergency leave of absence, told everyone it was for stress, and disappeared. I've been moving between cheap motels and friends' vacation properties ever since. He leaned forward. But then Philip found me, told me what was happening to you. That's when I realized this is bigger than just intimidating me. I told Dean everything, the forged will, the plan to have me committed. Philip's suggestion that my father's accident might not have been an accident at all. Dean's face paled. Uncle James? But that was 30 years ago. Apparently, my mother has always been willing to go to extreme lengths to get what she wants. We spent the next hour comparing notes, filling in gaps in each other's understanding. Dean had copies of threatening emails from an anonymous account that we were certain belonged to Diane. I had the psychiatric evaluation Philip had given me, clearly showing Dr. Winter's signature on a document full of fabrications about my mental state. Will you testify? I asked finally. If this goes to court? Dean was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee cup. I'd be risking everything. My career, maybe even my safety. I know. I wouldn't ask if there was any other way. He looked up, his eyes suddenly clear and determined. Aunt Martha used to say that courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about doing what's right even when you're terrified. A small smile crossed his face. Besides, I'm tired of running. Tired of looking over my shoulder. So that's a yes? That's a hell yes. He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. We're family, Margot. Real family, not whatever twisted version your mother has created. As we prepared to leave, Dean handed me a small flash drive. Everything I have, the threatening emails, the doctored photos, records of strange withdrawals from Aunt Martha's accounts in the weeks before she died. I don't know if any of it will help, but it might. Thank you. I tucked the drive into my pocket. Be careful, Dean. Evelyn thinks we'll be ready to file for an injunction next week. After that, things might get intense. You be careful, too. And Margot? He hesitated at the door. Whatever we find out about Uncle James, are you sure you're ready for that? I thought about the possibility that my entire childhood had been built on an even darker lie than I had imagined. I have to know, for him. For me, then we'll face it together. He gave me a quick, fierce hug before disappearing into the crowded street. I waited 10 minutes before leaving the cafe, taking a circuitous route back to where Evelyn's assistant was waiting to drive me back to the lake cabin. As we wound through the Blue Ridge Mountains, I thought about Dean's question. Was I really ready to learn the truth about my father's death? About my mother's true nature? The answer was both terrifying and liberating, yes. After decades of half-truths and manipulation, I was finally ready for complete honesty, no matter how painful. When I returned to the cabin, I found Philip waiting on the porch, his face grim. What's happened? I asked, immediately alert. Your mother's made a move. She's filed for emergency guardianship over you, claiming you're experiencing a psychotic break and are a danger to yourself. Can she do that? With Dr. Winter's evaluation and her standing in the community? Yes, and Margot, he hesitated. There's a warrant out for my arrest. Professional misconduct, allegedly tampering with legal documents. I sank onto the porch swing, my legs suddenly weak. This is my fault. I've dragged you into this mess. No. Philip's voice was firm. I made my choice, and I'd make it again. He sat beside me. But it means I need to be more careful now. I can't be seen with you or contact you directly. What about the cabin? Is it safe? For now, it's registered under my sister's married name. But we should prepare for the possibility that they'll find it eventually. I nodded, trying to think clearly despite the fear clouding my mind. What's our next step? Evelyn's expediting the injunction and... He hesitated. I found something about your father's accident. Medical records from just before he died. He had an appointment scheduled with a divorce attorney. The world seemed to tilt beneath me. He was going to leave her? It appears so. And there's more. Your father had started documenting strange incidents missing medication, unexplained bank withdrawals, veiled threats. He kept a journal hidden in his office at the university. Do you have it? Philip shook his head. Not yet. But I know where it might be. A storage unit he rented that your mother may not know about. I'm going to try to find it tomorrow. That night, alone in the cabin, I sat on the dock watching moonlight ripple across the lake. I thought about my father, his warm laugh, the way he would wink at me conspiratorially when my mother was being particularly rigid, his passion for teaching literature at the local university. Had he known he was in danger? Had he been trying to protect me even then? For the first time since this ordeal began, I allowed myself to cry for the father I had lost, for the mother I had never truly had, for the decades spent trying to earn love that always came with conditions. But as the tears subsided, something else took their place, a fierce, burning resolve. My mother had taken enough from me, my father, my autonomy, years of my life spent seeking her approval. She would not take my future too. I returned to the cabin and began to prepare. If my mother wanted a war, she would have one. But unlike her, I would fight with the truth as my weapon. And the truth, once fully revealed, would set us all free, even her, though she might never recognize it. The morning Philip was supposed to search for my father's journal, I awoke to frantic pounding on the cabin door. My heart leapt into my throat as I grabbed the fireplace poker, the only weapon available, and cautiously approached. "Margot, it's me, open up." Evelyn's voice, urgent and breathless. I flung the door open to find Evelyn Rhodes on my porch, impeccably dressed as always in a charcoal suit, but with an unusual dishevelment to her normally perfect bob. Behind her stood a tall, broad-shouldered man I didn't recognize. "We need to move," she said without preamble. "Now, pack only what you absolutely need." "What's happened?" "They found Philip. He's been arrested not just for professional misconduct, but for allegedly stealing documents from your mother's home." She stepped inside, glancing around the cabin. "The police questioned him for hours. He didn't reveal your location, but it's only a matter of time before they find this place." I felt as if the floor had dropped out beneath me. "Philip, is he okay?" "For now. I've arranged bail, but it's complicated. The important thing is keeping you safe until we can get the injunction filed." She gestured to the man behind her. "This is Marcus. He works with me on sensitive cases. He'll drive you to a secure location." I nodded, still processing the news as I quickly gathered my few belongings, the flash drive Dean had given me, and Philip's notes. "What about my father's journal?" I asked as we hurried to Evelyn's sleek black SUV. Philip managed to tell me where to look before they took him in. "I have someone checking the storage unit now." She opened the passenger door for me. "Margot, you should know your mother has escalated things. There are now police bulletins describing you as mentally unstable and potentially dangerous." The unfairness of it made my chest tight with anger. "So I'm a fugitive? For what, trying to protect myself from her schemes?" "Legally, yes. That's why we need to keep you out of sight until the hearing." Evelyn's expression softened slightly. "I know this is overwhelming, but remember, every extreme action your mother takes only strengthens our case when we finally get before a judge." We drove for nearly 3 hours, winding through back roads and small towns until we reached what appeared to be an upscale mountain resort. Instead of the main entrance, however, Marcus took a service road that led to a private cottage nestled among tall pines. "This belongs to a client who values their privacy," Evelyn explained as we entered the tastefully appointed space. "No one will look for you here. There's no internet connection, but there is a landline for emergencies. Use it only to call my direct number." She handed me a card. "Marcus will stay in the main house close enough to help if needed." After they left to retrieve supplies, I sat on the cottage's plush sofa, overwhelmed by how quickly everything was moving. 2 weeks ago, my life had been predictable, if somewhat empty, designing marketing materials for local businesses, occasionally dating men my mother inevitably found fault with, living in the shadow of her expectations. Now I was in hiding, a supposed mental patient on the run, fighting for my inheritance and possibly justice for my father's death. Around sunset, Evelyn returned with groceries, a laptop, and, to my astonishment, a small cardboard box. "We found it," she said, placing the box on the coffee table between us. "Your father's journal, along with some other documents he'd hidden." My hands trembled as I opened the box. Inside was a leather-bound journal, worn at the edges, with my father's initials embossed on the cover. Beneath it lay manila envelopes, old photographs, and what appeared to be legal documents. "I haven't looked through any of it," Evelyn said. "That should be private, between you and your father's memory. But if there's anything relevant to our case, I'll let you know," I promised, already opening the journal to the first page. Evelyn nodded. "I'll leave you to it then. Marcus is just a call away if you need anything." Alone with my father's words, I began to read. September 15th, 1994, I've started this journal at Dr. Westfield's suggestion. He says I need to document everything, even if it seems trivial. Especially if it seems trivial. The patterns emerge from the details, he says. I don't want to believe what I'm beginning to suspect about Caroline. She's the mother of my child, the woman I've built a life with. But I can no longer ignore the signs. The accidents that keep happening. The missing medication. The strange calls from numbers she won't explain. Yesterday, I found her in my study, going through my research notes. When I asked what she was looking for, she smiled that perfect smile and said, "Just making sure everything's in order, darling." But there was something cold behind her eyes. Something calculating. I need to be careful. For Margot's sake, if not my own, I read for hours, the words blurring through my tears as I followed my father's growing realization that his wife, my mother, was not simply controlling, but dangerously manipulative. He documented incidents of gaslighting, of subtle sabotage, of isolation from friends and family who might have seen through her facade. Most chilling were his concerns about my safety. March 2nd, 1995. Caroline was angry with Margot today for wanting to join the school play instead of the debate team. Nothing unusual in that. Caroline has always pushed Margot toward activities that align with her vision of success. But it was what she said later, when she thought I wasn't listening, that frightened me. "Sometimes I wonder if having a child was worth it," she told her friend on the phone. "They're supposed to be extensions of yourself, not disappointments." The coldness in her voice. I've never heard a mother speak of her child that way. Like Margot is a possession that's failed to perform as expected, I need to get Margot away from her influence. I've made an appointment with Michael Ross, an old law school friend who specializes in divorce and custody cases. Caroline doesn't know yet. I'm not sure how she'll react, but I need to be prepared for anything. The final entry was dated just 3 days before his fatal car accident. May 10th, 1995 met with Michael today. He agrees that the documentation I've gathered is concerning enough to make a strong case for full custody. We're filing the papers next week. I haven't told Margot yet. She's only 10 too young to understand the complexities, but old enough to be hurt by them. I plan to speak with her this weekend during our fishing trip. Just the two of us, away from Caroline's watchful eye. If anything happens to me, this journal should go to Philip Whitmore. He's the only one I trust to make sure Margot is protected. I pray it won't come to that. But it had. My father never took me fishing that weekend. Instead, he died on a rain-slicked mountain road. His car's brake lines mysteriously failed. I closed the journal, my hands shaking. All these years, I had believed the story my mother had carefully constructed, that my father had been careless, that his death was a tragic accident, that she was the strong one who had sacrificed everything to raise me alone. The truth was far darker. My father had seen through her facade. He had been trying to save me, and she had stopped him. Alongside the journal were other documents, financial records showing suspicious activities, letters from friends expressing concern about Caroline's controlling behavior, and most damning, a preliminary report from a private investigator my father had hired, noting that Caroline had been seen meeting with a mechanic in a neighboring town just days before the accident. It wasn't definitive proof, but combined with everything else, it painted a horrifying picture. I spent the night reading and rereading, piecing together the fragments of a truth that had been hidden from me for 3 decades. By dawn, my grief had hardened into resolve. This wasn't just about an inheritance anymore. It was about justice for my father, for Dean, for myself, and for anyone else my mother had manipulated and harmed over the years. When Evelyn arrived the next morning, I handed her the most relevant documents. "Can we use these?" I asked, my voice hoarse from crying but steady with determination. She reviewed them carefully, her expression grave. "For the inheritance case, absolutely. As for your father's death," she hesitated. "The statute of limitations on wrongful death is complex, especially with this much time passed. But if there was criminal involvement, there's no statute of limitations on murder." Murder. The word hung in the air between us, making real what I had only begun to suspect. "It would be extremely difficult to prove after all this time," Evelyn cautioned. "But these documents could certainly justify a reopening of the investigation." I nodded, processing this. "One step at a time. First, we secure the injunction. Then we deal with the guardianship claim. And then we address the past," Evelyn finished. "But Margot, are you prepared for what that might mean? For the public scrutiny? For seeing your mother potentially charged with serious crimes?" I thought about it. About the decades of manipulation. About the father I had lost. about the life I might have had. Yes, I said finally. Whatever the cost, the truth needs to come out. Not just for me, but for everyone who ever trusted her. Evelyn nodded, a new respect in her eyes. Then let's get to work. The hearing for the injunction is tomorrow. If the judge grants it, it will be our first victory and your mother's first public defeat. As Evelyn made calls and prepared our legal strategy, I stood by the cottage window looking out at the misty mountains beyond. Somewhere out there, my mother was orchestrating her campaign against me, confident in her ability to control the narrative as she always had. She didn't realize that the frightened, compliant daughter she thought she knew had finally awakened to the truth. And that daughter was now armed with something Caroline Holloway had never expected to surface: her own husband's damning testimony from beyond the grave. The county courthouse stood imposing against the clear autumn sky, its stone steps already crowded with local reporters and curious onlookers when Evelyn's car pulled up. News of the Holloway inheritance dispute had spread through Asheville's gossiping circles, fueled by my mother's carefully orchestrated public concern for her mentally unstable daughter. "Ready?" Evelyn asked, her hand on the car door. I took a deep breath, smoothing the conservative navy suit she had brought for me. As I'll ever be. Marcus, positioned as our security, exited first and surveyed the crowd before nodding. Evelyn and I emerged together, her presence beside me like a shield as we climbed the courthouse steps. Cameras flashed, and reporters called out questions that we ignored, our focus solely on the heavy wooden doors ahead. Inside, the marble-floored lobby was quieter, but no less tense. And there, waiting near the entrance to courtroom 3, stood my mother. Caroline Holloway was impeccably dressed as always, in a cream-colored suit that made her look both authoritative and victimized, a careful balance she had mastered over decades. Beside her stood Diane, playing the role of supportive family friend, and Dr. Winters, whose presence was clearly meant to reinforce the narrative of my supposed mental instability. My mother's eyes widened slightly when she saw me, the only sign that my appearance had surprised her. She had clearly expected me to remain in hiding, to be represented by counsel, but not present. "Margot," she said, stepping forward with arms outstretched as if for an embrace. "Darling, I've been so worried." I stepped back, keeping Evelyn between us. "Save the performance, Mother. We both know why we're here." A flicker of something, anger, fear, crossed her perfectly composed face before she regained control. "You're not well, dear. We're only trying to help you. By forging Aunt Martha's will? By threatening Dean? By trying to have me committed?" My voice remained steady, despite the rage and hurt swirling inside me. Dr. Winters stepped forward, his expression a practiced mask of professional concern. "This kind of paranoid thinking is exactly what we're worried about, Margot." "Your mother has been beside herself with worry," Evelyn intervened smoothly. "Dr. Winters, as you're named in our lawsuit for professional misconduct and fraud, I suggest you refrain from further comment that might be used against you in court." His face paled visibly. But before he could respond, the courtroom doors opened, and the bailiff called our case. Inside, the wood-paneled courtroom was nearly full. I spotted Dean in the back row, looking nervous but determined. Philip wasn't present, still dealing with the legal complications of his own arrest, but his attorney sat near the front, ready to provide testimony about the forged documents. Judge Eleanor Harmon, a severe-looking woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair and piercing eyes, surveyed the room as we took our places. My mother and her team on one side, Evelyn and I on the other. "This is a hearing for an emergency injunction regarding the estate of Martha Holloway," Judge Harmon began, her voice crisp and no nonsense. "I've reviewed the filings, and I must say, these are extremely serious allegations on both sides." She turned her sharp gaze to Evelyn. "Ms. Rhodes, you're claiming document fraud, coercion, and conspiracy to commit unlawful confinement. Those are extraordinary claims requiring extraordinary evidence." "We have that evidence, Your Honor," Evelyn replied confidently, "including testimony from the notary who witnessed the forgery, documentation of threats made against another beneficiary, and proof of financial inducement to a medical professional to provide false testimony." The judge turned to my mother's attorney, a sleek, silver-haired man named Harrison Powell, who had represented our family for years. "Mr. Powell, your client is claiming her daughter is experiencing a mental health crisis and is not competent to challenge the will. Yet Ms. Holloway appears quite composed today." "Appearances can be deceiving, Your Honor," Powell responded smoothly. We have expert testimony from Dr. Winters, who has been treating the family for years, that Ms. Holloway has a history of paranoid ideation that worsens under stress. I've never been treated by Dr. Winters, I interjected, unable to contain myself. Judge Harmon's eyebrows rose. Is that so? Dr. Winters, please approach the bench. What followed was 3 hours of methodical dismantling of my mother's carefully constructed narrative. Evelyn presented the evidence we had gathered. Dean's testimony about the threats that drove him into hiding. Financial records showing a substantial donation from my mother to Dr. Winters' research fund just days before he signed my psychiatric evaluation. And most damning of all, the original will with Martha's authentic signature, which clearly differed from the version my mother had presented. Throughout it all, my mother sat eerily composed, her expression betraying nothing. Only once, when Evelyn presented emails between her and Diane discussing how to handle Margot's inheritance problem, did I see her mask slip. A flash of cold fury quickly suppressed. Judge Harmon was thorough, questioning each witness with sharp precision, allowing no evasion or vague responses. When it was my mother's turn to testify, she played her role perfectly. The concerned parent, heartbroken over her daughter's delusions, only wanting what was best for me. Mrs. Holloway, the judge asked, can you explain why you waited 3 days to report your daughter missing if you were so concerned about her mental state? My mother dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. I was hoping she would come to her senses and return home. I didn't want to embarrass her by involving the authorities immediately. And the significant differences between the will presented at the initial reading and the one notarized by Mr. Whitmore? A simple clerical error, Your Honor. In the stress of losing my sister, there may have been some confusion with draft versions. A confusion that happened to benefit you by several $1 million? For the first time, my mother's composure faltered. I would never intentionally misrepresent my sister's wishes. The final testimony came from Philip's attorney, who presented Philip's sworn statement detailing how he had witnessed my mother and Diane pressuring Martha to change her will during her final illness, a change Martha had refused, leading them to resort to forgery after her death. By the time closing arguments were presented, the atmosphere in the courtroom had shifted palpably. The whispers from the gallery, the uncomfortable shifting of Dr. Winters in his seat, the growing rigidity in my mother's posture all signaled that her carefully constructed reality was crumbling. Judge Harmon took only 20 minutes to return with her decision. Having reviewed the evidence presented, I am granting the emergency injunction. All assets of Martha Holloway's estate will remain frozen, pending a full investigation into the allegations of document fraud and coercion. She fixed my mother with a stern gaze. Furthermore, I am dismissing the petition for emergency guardianship over Margot Holloway, as there is substantial evidence suggesting it was filed under false pretenses. She turned to me, her expression softening slightly. Ms. Holloway, you are free to return to your home and employment without legal impediment. The court apologizes for any distress this situation has caused you. Finally, she addressed the entire courtroom. Given the serious nature of the evidence presented today, I am referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for consideration of criminal charges. Court is adjourned. The sharp crack of the gavel echoed through the suddenly silent room. For a moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, my mother rose, her face a mask of cold fury as she gathered her belongings and swept toward the exit. Diane and Dr. Winters trailing behind her. As she passed me, she paused, leaning close to whisper, "This isn't over, Margot. You have no idea what you've done." I met her gaze steadily. "No, Mother. You have no idea what you've done. But you're about to find out." She flinched almost imperceptibly before continuing out of the courtroom, her head high, still playing the role of dignified victim for anyone watching. Dean made his way to me through the dispersing crowd, enveloping me in a tight hug. "You did it," he murmured. "You actually stood up to her." "We did it," I corrected, including him and Evelyn in my grateful smile. "But it's just the beginning." Outside the courthouse, reporters clustered at the bottom of the steps. My mother was already there, giving her performance tears glistening, voice breaking as she expressed concern for my condition and hope that I would get the help I need. Evelyn touched my arm. "You don't have to speak to them. We can go out the back," I shook my head. No more hiding. No more letting her control the narrative. I walked down those steps with my head high, Evelyn and Dean flanking me. The reporters immediately surrounded us, shouting questions. Ms. Holloway, is it true you've been in hiding? Are you suffering from mental illness as your mother claims? Why are you contesting your aunt's will? I raised a hand, and surprisingly, they quieted. I have been in hiding, I said clearly, my voice carrying across the courthouse steps, not because of mental illness, but because I discovered a plot to have me falsely committed to a psychiatric facility so that certain individuals could gain control of my inheritance. I saw my mother's face across the crowd, frozen in disbelief as I continued. Today, the court recognized the truth. I am grateful for justice being served, and I look forward to the full investigation that will reveal exactly what happened to my aunt's estate. I paused, then added, I also hope this investigation will extend to other troubling events in my family's history that may have been misrepresented. A reporter called out, Are you accusing your mother of criminal activity? I met my mother's gaze across the crowd. I'm not making accusations. I'm simply allowing the truth to come to light, whatever it may be. With that, I turned and walked to Evelyn's waiting car, ignoring the shouted questions that followed me. As we pulled away from the courthouse, I felt a weight lifting the weight of decades spent living under my mother's manipulation and control. The battle wasn't over. The full investigation would take months. There would be more hearings, possibly criminal charges, and the painful process of examining my father's death. But for the first time since Philip had slipped me that warning note, I felt something like hope. The truth was emerging piece by piece into the light, and in that light, I was finally beginning to see my own strength. The weeks following the courtroom victory unfolded like scenes from a movie I never expected to star in. My face appeared on local news, in newspaper articles, and across social media, the daughter who had exposed her prominent mother's schemes. The story resonated with people in a way I hadn't anticipated, drawing out others who had experienced similar family betrayals and manipulation. I returned to my apartment to find it had been meticulously searched. Personal items rearranged in that subtle way that left no evidence but sent a clear message. She had been there, looking for anything she could use against me. It no longer felt like home. After collecting essential belongings, I moved temporarily into a downtown loft owned by one of Evelyn's former clients who was spending the year abroad. Philip was released from jail, all charges against him dismissed as part of the widening investigation into my mother's activities. The first evening after his release, he joined Dean and me for dinner at the loft. To truth, Dean proposed a toast, raising his glass of wine. And to freedom, I added, the crystal ringing as our glasses met. Philip, still looking tired but with relief evident in his eyes, nodded. Your father would be proud, Margot. This is what he wanted for you to live free from her control. The mention of my father sobered us. The district attorney had agreed to review the circumstances of his death, but after 30 years, evidence was scarce. The mechanic my mother had allegedly met with had died years ago. The original investigating officers had retired or passed away. The physical evidence from the crash had long since been destroyed. We may never know for certain, Philip said gently, seeing the shadow cross my face. But what matters is that you know now. You see her for who she truly is. I do, I agreed, though the truth still cut deep. I just wish I'd seen it sooner. All those years— Don't, Dean interrupted firmly. Don't go down that road. We can't change the past. We can only move forward. He was right, of course. And moving forward was exactly what I intended to do. The following Monday, I met with the director of a local art gallery, who had reached out after seeing my story on the news. She had recognized my name from graphic design work I'd done for local businesses. Your compositions have always caught my eye, she said as we walked through the gallery's bright open space. There's something distinctive about your visual style. Have you ever considered showing your own art? I laughed, surprised. I haven't created my own art in years. Not since college. Why not? The question stopped me short. Why not indeed? The answer, I realized, was painfully simple. My mother didn't approve. She thought art was a hobby, not a career. The director, a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and kind eyes, nodded understanding. And now? Now, I suppose I can do whatever I want? The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. After decades of making decisions with my mother's approval in mind, the boundless freedom of choice felt almost dizzying. That night, I purchased canvas, paints, and brushes. I set up a small studio in one corner of the loft and stood before the blank canvas, paintbrush in hand, for nearly an hour before making the first stroke. Once I began, however, the images flowed dark at first. Shadowy scenes of confinement and fear, then gradually lightening, opening, expanding into vibrant landscapes and abstract expressions of release. I painted through the night and into the dawn, lost in the pure joy of creation without judgment. When Dean arrived later that morning with coffee and pastries, he found me surrounded by canvases, splattered with paint, exhausted but glowing. "Look at you," he said, handing me a much-needed coffee. "I don't think I've ever seen you look so alive." I surveyed my night's work, seeing the progression from darkness to light. I feel alive, for the first time in maybe forever. While I reconnected with my creativity, the legal proceedings continued their methodical pace. My mother had retreated to her home, emerging only for necessary appearances and carefully orchestrated interviews where she maintained her position as the concerned parent of a troubled daughter. Diane had disappeared entirely, rumored to have fled to relatives in Florida as the investigation tightened around them both. Dr. Winters, facing potential loss of his medical license, had agreed to cooperate with prosecutors, admitting that he had been pressured and paid to provide the false psychiatric evaluation. His testimony strengthened the case against my mother, but she remained outwardly confident, secured behind expensive lawyers and decades of carefully cultivated community respect. 3 months after the initial hearing, Evelyn called with news. "They've frozen all your mother's assets," she informed me. "The forensic accountants found evidence of multiple financial irregularities going back years, not just related to your aunt's estate, but other matters as well." "What kind of irregularities?" "Embezzlement from charitable foundations she managed, tax fraud, and most interesting, large payments to a private investigator who's been tracking you for years." I felt a chill. Tracking me? For what purpose? Control, most likely. "The investigator has agreed to cooperate in exchange for immunity. Apparently, your mother had him report on your movements, your relationships, your finances, anything she could use to maintain leverage over you." The revelation was disturbing, but somehow not surprising. It explained so much: how she always seemed to know details about my life I hadn't shared with her, how relationships mysteriously fell apart whenever my partners showed signs of encouraging my independence. "There's something else," Evelyn continued, her voice softening. "They found records of a payment to a mechanic dated 3 days before your father's accident. It's not definitive proof, but combined with your father's journal and the timing of his planned divorce filing, it's enough to reopen the investigation." I finished for her. "Yes, the DA wants to meet with you tomorrow to discuss proceeding with that aspect of the case." "Margot, are you sure you want to pursue this? Proving murder after 30 years is nearly impossible, and the process will be grueling." I considered the question seriously. Part of me wanted to focus on the future, to leave the painful past behind and concentrate on rebuilding my life. But another part, the part that remembered my father's warm laugh, his encouraging words, his plans to protect me, needed resolution. "I have to try," I said finally. "For him. He tried to save me. The least I can do is seek justice for him." The meeting with the district attorney confirmed what Evelyn had warned: the case would be difficult to prove. But the accumulation of evidence, while circumstantial, was compelling enough to justify formal charges. The news broke the following day with dramatic headlines. "Prominent Asheville widow charged in decades-old death of husband. Inheritance fraud investigation uncovers possible murder plot. Caroline Holloway accused of orchestrating husband's fatal accident." The media frenzy that followed was intense. Reporters camped outside the loft, hoping for statements. Old friends and acquaintances reached out, some offering support, others seeking gossip or a moment in the reflected spotlight. I declined most contact, focusing instead on my painting and on preparing for the long legal battle ahead. Through it all, Dean remained a steady presence, handling media inquiries and providing much-needed normalcy. Philip, though still navigating the professional fallout from his involvement, offered wisdom from his decades of observing my mother's behavior. And Evelyn continued to build the legal case with meticulous precision. 6 months after that first note from Philip, I received an unexpected visitor at the gallery where I had recently begun showing my work. I was hanging a new series of paintings, abstract explorations of freedom and constraint, when the gallery director approached with an uncertain expression. "There's someone asking to see you," she said. I told her you don't take unscheduled visitors, but she's quite insistent. Says her name is Diane Miller. My hand stilled on the canvas I was adjusting. Diane is here, now? Should I ask her to leave? I considered it. Diane had been my mother's closest ally in the scheme to control my inheritance and have me committed. She had disappeared when the investigation began, avoiding subpoenas and questioning. What could she possibly want now? Curiosity won out over caution. No, I'll speak with her. But would you stay nearby? The director nodded, leading me to a small office at the back of the gallery where Diane waited, pacing nervously. She looked different from when I'd last seen her. Thinner, less polished. The confident gleam in her eye replaced by something that looked almost like fear. "Margot," she said when I entered, making an aborted movement as if to approach me before thinking better of it. "Thank you for seeing me. What do you want, Diane?" She twisted her hands together. I have information. About your mother. About what really happened. Why would you share that with me now? You've been hiding for months." "Because I'm scared," she admitted, her voice breaking slightly. "Your mother, she's not who you think she is. She's not who I thought she was either." I almost laughed at the irony. "I think I know exactly who my mother is now." "No, you don't. It's worse." She glanced at the door, lowering her voice. I think she might have been involved in other deaths. Not just your father's. The chill that ran through me had nothing to do with the gallery's air conditioning. "What are you saying? Your Aunt Martha's death? It wasn't natural causes like everyone believes. And there were others people who got in Caroline's way over the years. She has methods, untraceable ones." I studied Diane's face, trying to determine if this was another manipulation. "Why tell me this? Why not go to the police?" "I have. But they need evidence, and I don't have enough." "But I know where to find it." She leaned forward, urgency in every line of her body. "Caroline keeps records. Of everything. She's meticulous that way. There's a hidden safe in her study, behind the portrait of your grandfather. I've seen her access it, but I don't know the combination." "And you think this safe contains evidence of... what, multiple murders?" "I think it contains the truth. About everything." Diane's eyes, once cold and calculating, now held genuine fear. "Margot, she knows I've talked to the police. I'm not safe anymore. No one who knows her secrets is safe." As implausible as it seemed, something in her terror rang true. It matched the calculating coldness I had glimpsed in my mother's eyes, the ruthless determination she had shown in trying to control my inheritance, my freedom, my very existence. "Why should I believe you? After everything you did?" Diane looked down. "I don't expect forgiveness. I was blinded by greed and by her. Charisma, I guess you'd call it. The way she makes you feel special when you're useful to her." She met my eyes again. "But I've seen behind the mask now, and I'm terrified of what she's capable of." I left the gallery that day with Diane's information and a growing sense that the darkness in my family's history might run deeper than I had imagined. The question was, what would I do with this knowledge? The answer came to me as I stood before a new canvas that night, brush in hand. I would do what I had been doing since that first note from Philip changed everything. I would seek the truth, no matter how painful. I would bring light to the shadows, and I would reclaim not just my future, but my past as well. Whatever secrets that hidden safe contained, it was time they were exposed. The plan came together over 3 tense days. Evelyn was initially skeptical of Diane's claims, viewing them as a possible attempt to redirect the investigation or gather information about our legal strategy. But as Diane provided more details, dates, names, specific methods, even Evelyn had to admit the possibility that we were dealing with something far more sinister than we had first imagined. If there's even a chance she's telling the truth, I argued during a strategy session in Evelyn's office, we need to look into this safe. "Margot, we can't just break into your mother's house," Evelyn countered. "Anything we find would be inadmissible in court. And if there's nothing there, we've committed a crime and potentially undermined our entire case." "What if we get a warrant?" Dean suggested. "Based on Diane's testimony?" Evelyn shook her head. "Her credibility is shot after her involvement in the inheritance fraud. No judge would issue a warrant based solely on her word, especially for allegations this extreme." We were at an impasse until Philip, who had been quietly listening, spoke up. "There may be another way," he said thoughtfully. "The annual Asheville Heritage Foundation Gala is this Saturday. Caroline hosts it every year at her home. She's been on the board for decades. The house will be full of people, including the mayor, the district attorney, several judges. And how does that help us?" I asked. A small smile appeared on Philip's face. "Because I'm still on the guest list. My invitation arrived last month, before all this began. Caroline is too conscious of appearances to have rescinded it publicly." "You want to search for the safe during the gala?" Evelyn looked doubtful. "Caroline would notice you wandering around the private areas of her house." "Not if she's distracted," I said slowly, an idea forming. "Not if I attend as well." Dean nearly choked on his coffee. "You, at Caroline's gala? After everything that's happened?" "Exactly because of everything that's happened," I explained, the plan crystallizing as I spoke. "My presence would create exactly the kind of scene that would keep all attention focused on the main rooms. No one would notice Philip slipping away to the study." Evelyn still looked concerned. "It's risky. If there's nothing in the safe, or if you're caught searching—" "Then we apologize for the misunderstanding and leave," Philip finished calmly. "But if Diane is telling the truth, if there is evidence of other crimes, this might be our only chance to find it." After much debate, we agreed on the plan. Philip would attend as invited. I would arrive fashionably late, creating the inevitable stir that would distract my mother and the other guests. While attention was focused on the unfolding drama, Philip would slip away to search for the safe. The night of the gala arrived with a theatrical punctuality, clear skies, a full moon, and a crisp autumn breeze that rustled the golden leaves still clinging to the trees lining my mother's driveway. I sat in Dean's car just beyond the property line, watching the procession of Asheville's elite arriving in luxury vehicles and evening wear. "Last chance to back out," Dean said. Studying my face in the dim light, I shook my head, adjusting the simple black dress I had chosen for the occasion. "No, I need to see this through. Then it's showtime." He squeezed my hand before stepping out to open my door. We walked up the long driveway together, ignoring the curious stares of late-arriving guests. At the entrance, a young server with a clipboard froze when he saw me. "Ms. Holloway," he stammered. "I don't see your name on the list." "I'm sure it was an oversight," I replied smoothly. My mother would never exclude her only daughter from the family's annual event. Before the flustered server could decide how to handle the situation, a ripple of whispers spread through the foyer as guests noticed my arrival. Conversations halted. Glasses paused midway to lips. And then, from the grand staircase, my mother appeared. Caroline Holloway stood perfectly still, one hand on the polished banister, a vision in deep burgundy silk that contrasted elegantly with her silver hair. For a brief moment, shock registered on her face before her social mask slipped seamlessly back into place. "Margot," she said, her voice carrying across the suddenly silent foyer. What an unexpected surprise. I moved forward, aware of every eye tracking my progress. "I couldn't miss the gala, Mother. It's tradition, after all." A tight smile appeared on her lips. "Indeed. Although I would have thought, given the circumstances, you might have preferred to stay away this year." "The circumstances?" I echoed, projecting my voice just enough to ensure everyone could hear. "You mean the fraud investigation? The charges related to Father's death? Or perhaps you're referring to the attempt to have me falsely committed?" Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. My mother's smile remained fixed, but her eyes hardened to flints. "This is hardly the venue for such discussions, Margot. Perhaps we should speak privately." "I think we've had enough privacy in this family," I replied evenly. Too many secrets kept for too long. Over my mother's shoulder, I glimpsed Philip slipping away from the crowd, using the distraction exactly as we had planned. I needed to keep the attention focused on our confrontation. "Ladies and gentlemen," my mother addressed the guests, her voice smooth as polished marble. "Please proceed to the ballroom. The orchestra is about to begin. I'll join you momentarily." As the guests reluctantly moved toward the ballroom, casting curious glances over their shoulders, my mother gripped my elbow with surprising strength and steered me toward a small side room. "What do you think you're doing?" she hissed once we were alone, all pretense of composure vanishing. "Have you completely lost your mind?" "That's always your go-to, isn't it?" I observed, maintaining my calm. "Anyone who challenges you must be crazy. You're ruining everything. Years of reputation building, community respect, Careful planning, all destroyed by your ridiculous vendetta. Vendetta? I repeated incredulously. You tried to have me committed to steal my inheritance. You threatened Dean. You forged legal documents. And if Diane is to be believed, that's just the beginning of your crimes. Something flashed in her eyes at the mention of Diane. Something cold and calculating that sent a chill through me, despite the warm room. So Diane has been speaking to you? She said softly. How interesting. And what exactly has she been saying? I matched her tone, keeping my voice low. Enough to make me wonder what's in the safe behind grandfather's portrait. For the first time in my life, I saw genuine fear cross my mother's face, a momentary flicker quickly masked, but unmistakable. She recovered almost instantly, a practiced laugh escaping her lips. Safe? There's no safe there. Diane is clearly more disturbed than I realized. We'll see, I replied, glancing at my watch. Philip had been gone for nearly 10 minutes, hopefully enough time. This conversation is over, my mother declared, smoothing her dress. I have guests to attend to. You can either join the party properly or leave. Those are your only options. Actually, I think there's a third option, said a new voice from the doorway. We both turned to see Detective Sarah Blackwood of the Asheville Police Department standing there, flanked by 2 uniformed officers. Behind them stood Philip, his expression grave but determined. Caroline Holloway. Detective Blackwood began formally. We have a warrant to search these premises, specifically the safe located in your study. My mother's composure cracked entirely. This is outrageous! You can't come into my home during a private event. Actually, we can, the detective interrupted, holding up an official document. Judge Harmon signed this 20 minutes ago, after reviewing new evidence provided by Mr. Whitmore. What evidence? My mother demanded, her voice rising. There is no evidence because there have been no crimes. Philip stepped forward, holding a small leather-bound book with faded green covers. I recognized it immediately, he said quietly. Your husband's journal wasn't the only one he kept, Margot. This one contains dates, names, methods, a meticulous record of Caroline's activities that James kept as insurance. He gave it to me for safekeeping shortly before his death, Philip continued. Told me to keep it hidden unless something happened to him. When it did, when his brake lines failed so conveniently, I should have come forward. But I was afraid. Caroline's influence was too great, and I had no proof beyond this journal. So I hid it, he admitted, regret heavy in his voice. In the one place I knew Caroline would never look inside the false bottom of her sister Martha's jewelry box. The same box that was moved to storage after Martha's death, the one I retrieved last week while searching for other documents. My mother's face had gone ghostly pale. This is absurd. A journal proves nothing. Anyone can write fiction. True, Detective Blackwood agreed. But the journal gives us probable cause to search for corroborating evidence, which, according to Mr. Whitmore, should be in your safe. 2 officers stepped forward. Mrs. Holloway, we need you to open the safe now. For a moment, I thought my mother might refuse or even try to flee. But 30 years of maintaining a perfectly respectable facade had conditioned her to respond to authority with outward compliance. Wordlessly, she led the officers and detective upstairs to her study, with Philip and me following at a distance. The portrait of my grandfather, stern and imposing in oils, swung away from the wall to reveal a modern safe with a digital keypad. Under Detective Blackwood's watchful eye, my mother entered the combination. Inside were folders, neatly labeled and organized. Financial records, photographs, small vials of clear liquid, and most damning of all, a collection of obituaries, each with dates and notes in my mother's precise handwriting. As the officers documented and collected the evidence, my mother sat rigidly in her desk chair, her eyes fixed on the window overlooking the garden where elegant partygoers still mingled, unaware of the drama unfolding upstairs. Did you hate him so much? I asked quietly, the question that had haunted me for months finally finding voice. My father, did you hate him? She turned to me, and for the first time I saw her clearly, not as the controlling mother who had dominated my life, but as a woman whose need for power had consumed her humanity. Hate? No, her voice was surprisingly calm. James was useful until he wasn't, just like everyone else. Even me? Your own daughter? A flicker of something regret, perhaps, though I couldn't be sure, crossed her face. You were supposed to be different. An extension of myself. But you were too much like him, too soft, too questioning. She shook her head slightly. Such a disappointment. Detective Blackwood stepped forward with handcuffs. Caroline Holloway, You're under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, and pending further investigation, potentially multiple counts of homicide. As the detective read her rights, my mother's eyes never left mine. There was no remorse there, no plea for understanding or forgiveness, only a cold assessment, as if she were already calculating her next move, her next manipulation. They led her away without drama, the perfect ending to her performance as the respectable widow of Asheville. The guests below would soon discover that their hostess had departed under circumstances that would dominate local conversation for years to come. Philip stood beside me in the empty study, both of us silent as the weight of 3 decades of secrets settled around us. "What happens now?" I asked finally. "Justice," he replied simply. "For your father, for you, for everyone she's harmed over the years. And after that?" He smiled gently. "After that, Margot, you live. Freely and fully, the way your father always wanted you to." 3 months later, I stood on the wide porch of the Charleston house my aunt had left me, watching the winter sun set over the harbor. The renovation was nearly complete. The old cypress floors gleaming, the walls freshened with warm colors, the gardens cleared of decades of overgrowth. Dean had come for the weekend, helping me hang my paintings in the front parlor. The first exhibition of my work had been unexpectedly successful, with several pieces sold and a commission from a local hospital for their new patient wing. My mother's trial was still pending, delayed by complex legal maneuvers and the expanding investigation as authorities uncovered more victims. I had given my testimony, told my truth, and then stepped back, refusing to allow her continued presence in the media to dictate my life. That evening, as Dean and I shared dinner on the porch, watching boats drift across the darkening water, he raised his glass. "To new beginnings," he said. I touched my glass to his. "And to the truth, however painful, however long it takes to surface." As the stars emerged above us, I felt a sense of peace that had eluded me for 40 years. The house around me wasn't just an inheritance. It was a symbol of liberation. My father had tried to give me freedom, and though it had taken decades longer than he had intended, his last gift had finally reached me. I was no longer defined by my mother's expectations or manipulations. No longer trapped in patterns of seeking approval that would never come. No longer blind to the truth of my own worth. The Holloway legacy hadn't turned out to be what anyone expected, not wealth or social position or carefully maintained appearances. Instead, it was this: the courage to face darkness and still choose light. The strength to break chains that had bound generations. The wisdom to recognize that the greatest inheritance isn't what's left to you, but what you choose to become in spite of, or perhaps because of the truths you uncover along the way. As night settled fully over Charleston, I found myself smiling at the stars, suddenly certain that somewhere, my father was smiling too, because the truth, as he had always believed, had finally set us both free.